So we know that diversity, equity, and inclusion it's in our values. Inclusion is in our values. Mayo's commitment to fully, to a, inclusion is in our values. Mayo's commitment to a fully inclusive environment as an essential expression. Oh, inclusion is in our values. Mayo's commitment to a fully inclusive environment is just an outpouring of our rich ties values. Respect, integrity, compassion, healing, teamwork, innovation, excellence, stewardship. None of these are exclusive of inclusion. As a matter of fact, I would say that these rich ties values really draw us into relationship with one another and creating the best possible outcomes for our patients. So here are four truths about human beings. First, human beings can learn, change, and grow. Who I am today is not who I was at 17. And I am so appreciative of that, right? And so what to recognize that people can learn, change, and grow, we don't have to see evidence of it, right? So people learn, change, and grow on their own time frame. But what can we do to help them learn, change, and grow? We give them information. We give them opportunities. We give them feedback so that they can use those as tools for learning, changing, and growing. What we also know as a truth about human beings is that we do what we think works, even when it doesn't. Right? So we do things that we think work even when it doesn't, when it's not effective, because it's been successful in the past. Next is all human behavior is goal directed. We must understand that all behavior is seeking some goal, even if the person can't articulate it directly. We do recognize that people are doing things for a particular purpose. And later we'll talk about what that purpose might be, what those purposes might be. And that lastly, an attitude is a reaction to goal accomplishment. When, I don't know if you've had a teenager in your life or you remember being a teenager, but when teenagers get what they want, what kind of attitude do they have? It's typically a positive or a good attitude. Simultaneously, or at another place, if teenagers are denied access to what they want, how is their attitude reflective of that? It is typically not a good attitude. So what we must recognize is that attitude is a response to goal achievement, but it is not an end unto itself. And so if we're able to help people meet or reach their goals, then they will have a good attitude. So going back to the previous point, all human behavior is goal directed. So what are the goals of human behavior? And so I believe, just as Alfred Adler introduced and Dreikers introduced, this idea that human beings are after three things. They are after significance, belonging, and safety. Significance suggests that I'm a person with purpose and power, and I have the ability to do something. I have significance, right? I can contribute. I may not be able to do what others can do, but I certainly can do what I'm able to do. And so we're oftentimes looking for significance. And then next, we're also looking for belonging. We want to be in relationships with people who understand our significance. I would submit to you that oftentimes, at least I feel this way, that my friends, the people that I select in my life, oftentimes recognize my significance, sometimes more than my own family, right? And so this idea of significance plays into this belonging. So the significance plays into this belonging. And lastly, we are looking for physical, mental, emotional, spiritual safety to be in relationships with people who understand our significance. So we're all looking for significance, belonging, and safety. And so sometimes I toy with this idea that H 4-H, the agricultural leadership development activities, right? And so that's they help do our county fairs and our state fairs. I mean, that's the center point of those. And why do kids join 4-H? For some sense of significance, belonging, and safety, right? And why do kids join gangs? For significance, belonging, and safety. And so they both are kids are trying to get the same things, but their activities are very different. And I wonder what it might look like if 4-H started adopting gangs. Is there leadership development in gangs? Of course there is. Are there, hands-on projects in gangs? Why, certainly. And so I wonder what would happen if young people had different choices, if we could provide them with different choices and opportunities. Would they take advantage of those? And I believe that they would, right? So we're all looking for safety, significance, and belonging. And so the question then becomes, how are you getting your significance? How are you connecting with people and getting a sense of belonging? And lastly, what does it mean for you to be safe? We're all looking for significance, belonging, and safety. Context is everything. Context is everything, right? So why is it that we do not have dinosaurs as pets today? Why is it that dinosaurs aren't around? And there are a number of scientific and theological explanations for the disappearance of dinosaurs, but I'll boil it down simply to the fact that they could not adapt to the environment, right? There was a shift in the environment and they could not adapt. And so what we have to recognize is that context drives many of our behaviors, drives our responses, our interactions with other people. So context is extremely important. And I say it's everything. So that leads us to this conversation about the context that we grew up in, right? So how do we learn to interact with the world? And so we'll spend some time exploring that for ourselves. So what I'd like for you to do is to look at this particular diagram, and you can either do it on your paper, you can do it on the screen, but I want you to tell me, what did you learn, or what were the conversations about groups of people growing up? And so the groups across the top are African Americans, European Americans, Latino Americans, Asian Americans, disabled Americans, and Native Americans. And so I want you to tell me, what did the groups on the side teach you about each of those groups? And so what did parents and families say about those groups that we just mentioned across the top? What did friends say or express about those groups going across the top? What did TV, movies, and media say about those groups going across the top? And then lastly, what has been your personal experience with each of those groups? But I want you to do this exercise in a particular kind of way. What I'd like for you to do is to put a plus where there was positive conversation or there was positive information given about one of those groups. I want you to put a minus where there was negative information about those groups being shared. And I want you to put a 0 where there was no conversation at all about those groups as you were growing up or in your community, all right? Pluses, minuses, and zeros. Now, you can have pluses and minuses in the same quadrant or the same square, but the size of your plus and the size of your minus will dictate what you learned. So a big plus means lots of positive, a little minus means a little bit of negative, all right? And a 0 means that there was never a conversation you had at all. All right, so pluses, minuses, and zeros. We'll give you a couple of minutes right now. All right, as you've put your pluses, your minuses, and your zeros on your sheet, was there anything that you thought about, or any ways in which you were thinking about that process? Now, I don't need to know what your pluses and minuses and zeros are on, but I just want you to think about what those might mean for you, or what they might have meant for you, right? So pluses, minuses, and zeros. What I'd like to offer you is I'd like for you to cut your background, your geographic region, your parents some slack. Right? So what we know about human beings is that we're not we can't know everything. We can't experience everything. We have one lane of life, so to speak, and our capacity to know and understand and experience everything is limited by our physical bodies. What I'd like to suggest to you is to recognize that it is not your fault what you learned or what you didn't learn. It is not your fault, particularly as you were growing up. It's not your fault. However, it is your responsibility to do something when you find that what you've learned or what you've missed is impeding you in reaching your goals. So it is not your fault, but it is your responsibility. It is not where you're from, it's where you're at. Right? That was from Silk Times Leather. It was a hip hop group in the 80s. So it's not where you're from. It's not your background doesn't necessarily have to limit you. You don't have to succumb to those old ways of being, but you can, through cognition, through practice, through relationships, move yourself from where you came from to actually where you want to be, or where you want to see yourself. So where you're from is less important than where you find yourself today. So we're going to talk a little bit about the effects of unconscious bias, and we're going to use the three scenarios that we're giving in the online training to talk about William, Jane, and Kate. And so let's go ahead and get started. So before we get too far into this session, I want to talk a little bit about this idea of fit, right? And so all too often, people are disqualified from jobs and opportunities, or not given even advances because people say they don't fit. And so what exactly is this idea of fit becomes a real question. And so when we think about fit, we should be thinking about how it is that we predetermine what the goals and aspirations are of the activities that we're engaged in.